Today, we're going to trace the pretty incredible intellectual journey of a 20th century thinker you may have never heard of, but whose ideas, well, they feel more relevant than ever. His name was Murray Bookchin. I mean, that's the central question, right? How does that happen? Bookchin's life spans some of the biggest political and social upheavals of the entire century, and his story is just a fascinating look at how radical ideas can shift and evolve over time. To really get a handle on his ideas, you have to understand the world that made him. A world just simmering with revolutionary fervor and really deep social unrest. So we're going to follow his journey pretty much chronologically. We'll start with his childhood during the Great Depression and follow the breadcrumbs all the way to his most groundbreaking theories. Okay, let's start at the beginning and explore the world that really forged Murray Bookchin's early beliefs. Bookchin talked about his childhood in 1930s New York like he was living in two completely different worlds at the same time. On one hand, you had these bustling, close-knit immigrant communities where everybody knew each other, everybody looked out for each other. But then, on the other hand, you had the world of the factories where his parents worked, this harsh, impersonal, industrial world. And seeing that contrast every single day, that was a powerful lesson. Get this, he was just 6 years old when he saw the collective grief of his entire community over the execution of Sacco and Vanzetti. The image of his neighbors, his own grandmother just weeping in the streets, that stuck with him. It wasn't just some story in a newspaper, it was this raw, real experience of class injustice that would really shape his politics for the rest of his life. You know, the Great Depression made the idea of a broken system incredibly personal for Bookchin. The constant worry about eviction, the scarcity of food, these weren't political talking points. This was his childhood. So it's really no surprise he grew up absolutely convinced that the whole system needed to be torn down and rebuilt from scratch. Bookchin's political education didn't happen in a classroom, it happened on the streets of New York. I mean, at 9 years old, he's joining the communist youth movement. By the time he was a young teenager, he was already a seasoned activist, standing on soapboxes, debating with adults. This wasn't a phase, it was his life, a total commitment to a cause he believed in with everything he had. But no matter how dedicated he was, some key events were about to happen that would make him seriously question the ideology he was raised in. Okay, so imagine dedicating your entire young life to a cause, and then one day, the leaders just flipped the script with no explanation. That's exactly what happened to Bookchin. For years, the Communist Party had been preaching this uncompromising, pure revolution. Then, boom, in 1935, they order everyone to form alliances with the exact same liberals they'd been taught to hate. For young idealists like him, it felt like a profound betrayal. It seems like the movement cared more about political games than real change. So just as he's feeling totally disillusioned with the party, newsreels from the Spanish Civil War start showing up in theaters. And what he saw? It wasn't a revolution led by a state or some single top-down party. No, it was something else entirely. In those grainy newsreels from Spain, Bookchin saw something that would change his life. He saw workers inspired by this philosophy called anarcho-syndicalism. A bit of a mouthful, I know, but they were taking over factories and farms and just running them themselves. Think about that. A revolution not led by politicians, but by ordinary people, organizing from the ground up. This was so different from the rigid, top-down approach of the communists, and it just blew his mind wide open. This was a massive turning point for him. The Communist Party had always insisted that you needed a strong, centralized leadership for a revolution to work. But Spain showed him a totally different way. It showed him that workers could actually liberate themselves without waiting for orders from on high. And this idea that real freedom comes from the bottom up, not the top down, that would become a cornerstone of his thinking for the rest of his life. All right, let's fast forward a bit. We're in the post-war era now. The old revolutionary hopes were kind of fading, and Bookchin's focus started to shift to a new, growing threat that he was seeing all around him. After the war, Bookchin's education continued, but his classroom was now the factory floor and the sprawling suburbs of post-war America. He was seeing the human and environmental cost of so-called progress firsthand, the choking smog, the endless highways paving over the countryside. And he started to connect the dots. The same system that exploited workers was also exploiting the planet. What is just wild is how far ahead of the curve Bookchin was on this. We're talking years, decades, before the environmental movement became mainstream. He was already sounding the alarm. His book, Our Synthetic Environment, came out 6 months before Rachel Carson's famous Silent Spring. But he went even further. He wasn't just critiquing a few bad chemicals, he was arguing that the root of the problem was the grow or die logic of capitalism itself, a system that, by its very design, has to consume and destroy just to keep going. So then we get to the 1960s, and there's this huge new wave of radicalism. The civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, the counterculture. But Bookchin, who's now this veteran of the left, he's looking on and seeing a lot of the same old mistakes getting repeated. Bookchin saw all the incredible energy of the 60s with this mix of hope and, frankly, a lot of concern. He loved the passion of the young activists, but he also saw them making mistakes he'd seen before. He argued that without a clear vision, without a long-term strategy, all the protests in the world wouldn't create lasting change. It wasn't enough to just be against the system. You had to have a serious plan for what you wanted to build in its place. And this brings us to what is really Bookchin's central, most original idea. It's the concept that connects all the different threads of his journey, from class struggle to anarchism and finally to ecology. So this is where Bookchin makes his most important move. He argued that the problem wasn't just capitalism, it was something much deeper, something that's been with us for thousands of years: hierarchy. The very idea that some people are inherently better than others and have the right to command and control them. This could be about class, sure, but it could also be about gender, race, or any other arbitrary line you can draw. Now, that is a really radical idea when you stop and think about it. It means that even if you could magically get rid of capitalism tomorrow, you could still be living in a deeply oppressive society. I mean, imagine a world with no rich or poor, but where a powerful government bureaucracy controls every single aspect of your life. For Bookchin, that is not freedom. The goal isn't just to change who's in charge, it's to get rid of the very idea of anyone being in charge of anyone else. And this quote just brilliantly ties it all together. This was his final synthesis. Our ecological crisis, he concluded, is a direct result of our social crisis. A society that's built on a logic of dominating other people, men over women, one ethnic group over another, bureaucrats over citizens, that society will inevitably eventually apply that same destructive logic to the natural world. So what's the big takeaway here? Whether you agree with all of his conclusions or not, Bookchin's life offers a really powerful critique of past failures and a compelling vision for a very different kind of future. Bookchin's entire intellectual quest leaves us with this one profound and honestly very challenging question. Can we actually create a world without domination? He believed that the answer to that question will determine not only the future of our society, but the future of our planet. It's a question that asks us to look not just at the world around us, but at the hierarchies we carry around inside ourselves, and it feels more urgent now than maybe ever before.